Polls can tell us a lot about an election and also a lot about our own country. What do people care about? What are they concerned about when it comes to our future leaders? Pollsters can tell us things by votes and by context, but sometimes those polls can completely miss the mark. Kirby Goidel, a Texas A&M political science professor, is here to tell us why even those that miss the mark have value. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Of course, glad to be here.
Okay, so first and foremost, why do polls matter? Obviously, it helps keep our democracy running, but like I mentioned before, it can tell us more than just what people are kind of thinking at that moment.
Well, the thing we get mad at is when we don't predict it right? And so when we miss the prediction, everybody says, oh, the polls are wrong. They didn't tell us anything. But what the polls are doing is they're guiding our behavior. They're guiding our expectations. Candidates are responding to the polls that they're running. They're deciding what issues to focus on. They're deciding how to frame the issue. Now, there is a big myth that candidates just do whatever the polls tell them to. That's not how they use the polls. They use the polls to inform and guide them in terms of how they're communicating with voters, what issues are most important, what issues are most likely to move voters, and how can I talk about this issue in a way that's going to best connect with voters.
That is something that I think a lot of messaging gets out there, right? You are kind of trying to figure out the pulse of the country, and if you don't know what they're talking about, well, this is a good way to do it. You recently wrote something for Texas A&M today on this very issue. You said in the article, quote, polls do poorly at picking a winner. Why is that true?
Well, if a race is really close, now polls actually do pretty well picking a winner, but that's if the race is not very close. It's kind of like in a football game, if we have a really clear favorite, most people pick the winner.
Right.
But when it gets really narrow, when the two sides are really evenly matched, it becomes harder and harder to pick the winner. And what the polls are really telling us is this race is going to be really close. And when it's within a margin of error, it's not a coin toss exactly, but it's a very close race, and it's hard for the poll to really help to decide who's going to win on election day, because it still matters who votes. It still matters who turns out.
This has been something that I think has been forefront for a lot of folks since 2016, right? 2016 was the real year that everybody was kind of caught off guard by what the polls were saying versus what actually happened on election day. So why then do we keep trying to do this exercise if 2016 can happen? It likely can happen again, especially given how tightly contested some of these national political races are.
Well, the national polls in 2016 were actually pretty good. They were within the margin of error in terms of Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump in terms of their national vote. But presidential elections are state elections. They're run at the state level. And the presidential election in 2016, it could have been flipped if we had enough people, if we had the same number of people it takes to fill Cal Field, if we could have spread them out across 3 states, we could have changed the election outcome. The difference was 80,000 votes in 3 states. That's hard to predict.
Yeah. That is true. Okay, so you mentioned that politicians, they think about these polls, they look at these polls when it comes to their messaging to voters. Should people that are running for political office, should they be paying attention to polls?
Yeah, but what you want to do is you want to get down below. We've talked a little bit. The poll that gets the most, that generates the most headlines is that horse race number. Who's winning? Who's losing by how much? But what we really want to know is what's going on beneath the surface. We want to know what type of voter is supporting which candidate. For example, Biden right now is doing not as well as would be expected among non-white working class voters. That's a real problem for the Democratic Party, and the polls are making that very clear, and it's something they have to address. It's also telling us what issues people are concerned about. It tells us what perceptions they have of the candidates. So, for example, Biden's age. It's a real concern. Is it fair? I don't know, but it's a real concern for voters, and the polls are saying that loud and clear.
Real quick, we got about 30 seconds here. A lot of this is philosophy, but how can we incorporate this into actual use, the polls, into what might happen in the polls?
Well, what they're really helping us do is they're helping us tell the story about what the election is about. And so how you would want to see it incorporated is we want to know why voters did what they did. We want to know what they expect. We want to know what they're looking for out of government. And there the polls are better than any other piece of information that we have, because they're based on random samples and they're not based on who's screaming the loudest. And they continue to serve that purpose in democratic government.
We will link to the article that you wrote and the article that we post on kbtx.com. Kirby Goidel from Texas A&M, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.